Hello and welcome once again to the Waters and Stanton video channel. My name's Peter Waters, call sign G30JV, and I have to say that the response to the last video talking about ham radio operators that have come back into the hobby, that the response from that video was quite amazing. I think at the last count there was about 60 or 70 comments, and all pretty constructive comments. Certainly a lot from ham operators who had recently come back into the hobby or were thinking about coming back into the hobby. Comments from Australia, America and so forth. So it's gratifying to know that there is some positives coming from this very serious situation that we all find ourselves in all over the world. I think that the comments really underline the fact that if you're coming back into the hobby, then there's been a lot of changes, a lot of things that were there, say, 20 years ago, have either been developed or have been overtaken by other things. I mean, one of the big changes in recent times, of course, has been data modes. And data modes, well, it's good and bad, you know. The data modes are providing communication at times when we thought it just wasn't possible. I mean, 6 meters is a good example of that. 6 meters can appear to be closed, but data modes are providing, or proving rather, that you can communicate on a band which seems to be empty. In other words, there is propagation there, but it's only propagation that can be explored using data modes that are capable of handling very, very weak signals which are essentially below the noise level. Quite amazing, quite exciting. Of course it does take away activity from other parts of the band. I had to interrupt this video because I needed to sort out an aerial problem, and I didn't realise how warm it was, so that's why I'm dressed like this. It's not an advert. But the aerial problem did remind me of a story. I've got one or two stories I've slipped in recently. A story that is absolutely true. It concerns 160 meters. In fact, it relates to the story I told recently about going to the wrong house, climbing over the gate. Having sorted that out, we went to the site. Now I should explain that this site was on a sort of a farm, small holding type arrangement. I can't really remember the details, but it was certainly, we had a barn to operate in, and we'd been down there earlier to set up the antennas. Now, the best antenna for 160 meters for DX is a vertical antenna, or at least that's what we thought, and I think that's probably been proved over time that a vertical antenna is great for 160 meters. So what we thought we'd do was we'd support it by a balloon. Now, balloons weren't so readily available back in the 1960s, but you could actually acquire meteorological balloons. I'm not quite sure what they did. I suppose they looked up in the air and they sent back some sort of data, and they crashed to the ground when they got too high and exploded. The problem was, the main problem was actually getting gas to inflate the balloon. Anyway, we did manage to get a cylinder of gas, and I'm not quite sure what fibs we told as to why we needed the gas, but we managed to get a cylinder of gas to inflate this balloon. And we inflated this balloon, and we secured the wire to it, and up it went in the air. And it was amazing. I think it was about, well, I think it was a quarter wave, 160 meters, 130 odd feet, whatever that is in meters. And that was floating up in the air on this farm, and that was great. So we then went back home, and the arrangement was to go back to this barn in the evening. As I say, it was a 160 meter contest in the winter, in February I think it was, and we were to operate on 160 meters, and we were really geared up and excited for this. When we got there, we found that the aerial was no longer vertical, it was horizontal. And the reason it was horizontal is because it was lying on the ground. And when we finally sort of traced the end of this aerial, the balloon was peppered with shot. Somebody had clearly taken a pot shot at this balloon with sort of gun that you fire at birds, I suppose, or pigeons, or whatever it is you fire. Anyway, it was completely peppered with shot, and there was our antenna on the ground. Needless to say, we didn't really operate on 160 metres that night, but the interesting fact was that in the local newspaper, there was a weekly newspaper, local newspaper, Romford Recorder was the newspaper, that's right, and in that paper was a photograph taken early in the day when it was still daylight of this balloon, and it said, "What is this? What is this? What is this sort of floating balloon," or whatever it was, over Romford, question mark. I can't remember what the text was now, but obviously the photo had been taken before the balloon had been shot down. So there we are, that was 160 metres. Another little story for you when we were teenagers, the things we got up to, all in the course of science, of course. Anyway, that's a little interlude. Back to the main thrust of this video, because one of the things that you will experience is, unfortunately, the sunspot cycle. We are at the bottom of the sunspot cycle at the moment. I think it's generally reckoned to be around about June, July. But you don't actually know when you've reached the bottom of the sunspot cycle until it starts to go up again. But I think generally speaking we can say this summer is going to be the sunspot minimum. And that's in some ways bad news, because it means conditions on the HF bands are pretty poor. Not so bad on the lower bands, but on 2015, 17, 10, etc. They're pretty poor. The good news, of course, is that things can only get better. So I think that we can look forward to some better conditions. Sporadic is currently active, so we should see 10 metres and 6 metres spring into action, 4 metres, and it might affect 2 metres occasionally. So there is some things to look forward to, but I think if you're coming back on the bands from a while back, do bear in mind that we are at the bottom of the sunspot cycle at the moment, and so conditions can't really get any worse. They can only get better. I've already spoken about equipment in the previous video, and I guess that if you're going to come back into the hobby, you need to consider equipment, and you'll either find some of the gear you had is still around and still working, or you may have to purchase some new commercial equipment. And I did highlight some of the choices, but I know it's a big thing, and by all means give our sales guys a call, and they'll guide you through what might suit you. One of the big changes, of course, for a lot of you coming back to the hobby is that the enjoyment you got was in building and modifying equipment, because that was, you know, that was the traditional way of the hobby. You built your equipment or you modified it. It was a very much hands-on, tactile, constructional hobby, and that's what got a lot of people going. But of course, these days it has changed, and it's changed for two reasons. First of all, you don't have to build your own equipment now because you can buy it off the shelf. But for those that are somewhat older, and I certainly include myself in that, you get to the point where you probably haven't got the ability to build the equipment anymore anyway. I know personally my eyesight is not nearly as good as it used to be, and I would certainly struggle in building anything complex at all. So there are some physical reasons why that side of the hobby maybe have gone forever for you and a lot of us. We are getting to the point where we no longer are able to undertake constructional projects, and of course the components aren't so readily available now. Now I think we've moved on, but I think we've moved on in an interesting way, and that is that because our main activity now is operational, we need to explore that and find out what are the best ways for us to personally, each person's got their own preferences. I think that we need to realise that you don't have to have the biggest aerial, the largest tower, the highest powered radio in order to enjoy the hobby. I sometimes relate it to fishing. You know, you could put a rod over Southend Pier and perhaps catch something. I'm not a fisherman, so I don't know, but you put your rod over Southend Pier and you might catch 2 or 3 fish. But you could put a whacking great big net over, I guess, and pick up lots and lots of fish. But is that really the enjoyment? No, I think the enjoyment for a lot of people in ham radio is the challenge. Now, I have in the past have had a tower, and I've had a 3-element Yagi, HF Yagi and so forth. I've operated a very large station in the USA, massive, great towers, and you could work anything you wanted to. You could almost open the band. But is that what everybody wants? I'm not so sure it is, because the challenge has gone. I think a lot of you coming back into the hobby will get the same enjoyment that you probably originally had of a challenge. And that challenge is often derived from fairly basic equipment. You don't need a 3-element Yagi if you haven't got room for one. You put a wire down the garden, you have your G5RV, your half-wave dipole, your end-fed wire, your antenna tuner. No, you're not going to work the world. Not all at once anyway. But it's the challenge. It's the challenge of working what is available. And the same with equipment, really. You don't need loads and loads of equipment. Yes, it's nice to have loads and loads of equipment if that's what you want. You could be a photographer with 10 lenses, but you can only use one lens at a time. With radio, you can only use one radio at a time, generally speaking. So I think that you need to appreciate that the enjoyment in the hobby is in the challenge, and each person has their own particular challenge, and each person has their own particular preference. I mean, I've recently started to operate on 2 meters. Now, it's a band that I did operate on many years ago on AM crystal control, but I've gone back into 2 meters because I thought, you know, I need something different. And it's a bit of a learning curve because, you know, 2 meters is a million miles away from 20 meters in terms of what's there to work, the protocols of operation and so forth. But it's a challenge, it's an enjoyable challenge, I find. So if you're a newcomer to ham radio, or if you've come back into the hobby, don't be dismayed because you have to buy commercial equipment and there's nothing to construct. The fact is, no, there isn't much to construct these days apart from aerials, and you can make your own accessories. But I think the challenge is to operate within your own, not capabilities, but with your own limitations, because most of us now have got limitations of garden space and so forth. So to enjoy the hobby and come back into the hobby, appreciate that it has changed, but that there's a lot of challenges still there. And I would encourage those that have been on the air for quite a long time now to welcome some of these newcomers or to some of these old timers coming to the hobby. They probably know quite a lot about ham radio. They probably know more about radio than you. They've certainly got the history up there. They know what the enjoyment was in the past. And they can tell you a tale or two. So, in in summary, what I would say is welcome back to the hobby. If you've come into the hobby again, welcome back to the hobby. If you're a newcomer, well, you're equally welcome. Enjoy yourself. Treat the hobby as a challenge and meet that challenge no matter what. If you've got a small garden, fine, you've got a small garden. If you've only got a wire aerial, you've only got a wire aerial. I've got a 5-element 2-metre Yagi. It's not going to rock the world, but I enjoy it. I enjoy using it, and I know that I can't compete with the guy with the tower and the 9/9 stacked array. I can't compete with him, but I don't need to compete with him. I just want to enjoy myself, and that's ham radio for you. So I've nattered on a lot, but I do hope you'll enjoy the hobby of ham radio. And as I said before, I keep putting these videos up on the basis that, you know, I hope that it does perhaps inspire you to do things. But above all, enjoy the hobby. Take care, keep safe, see you soon.